Hello everybody, it's Good Friday, and it's strange that we call it Good Friday because when you look at what happened to Christ in the week of Holy Week, it was anything but good today. But the reason we call it Good Friday is because of the good for us. So I left off yesterday talking about the Passover and them in the Garden of Gethsemane and Jesus being taken captive by the high priest, held on trial all through the night. Well, this morning, as sunlight rose, he was taken to Pontius Pilate to execute him for heresy, blasphemy. He, in the trials, they asked him if he was basically God, and he said, "I am," which they considered blasphemy, but it was absolute truth. So, you know, you see the hypocrisy within all of that. So they take him to Pontius Pilate, who is the regional governor, to be tried for murder, or to be tried in order to be put to death. The Romans had taken away the ability of the Jewish priests to execute capital punishment or death penalty under their law. That can only be done by the Romans, so they had to go to Pilate. Well, Pilate listened to him, and it's really interesting when they take him to Pilate, they go to Praetorium, and they won't enter because they don't want to defile themselves for Holy Week, yet they're going to put Christ on trial. But anyway, so Pilate listens to him, says he doesn't find any wrong in with him. The priests and elders are still, calling for his death, so he sends him to Herod, who is the governor of, or the person who is over Galilee and Nazareth, which is where Jesus was from. He sends him back. Pontius talks to him again, wants to set him free. They want to have nothing to do it, so he sends him off to be scourged, to be whipped, in hopes that they would, then allow him to be free. Well, when he was scourged so badly that when he came back to Pilate, Pilate made the comment that he barely even resembled a man. The cat of nine tails that was used had bone and metal fragments in it, and so it literally ripped the skin apart. They took a crown of thorns eventually and placed it on his head and pushed it into his scalp. They put a purple robe around him and mocked him as they were heading him off to be crucified. But even with the scourging, the Jewish priests and elders still called for his death. And so Pilate made one last plea that he would free one of the prisoners, one of the captives, and asked if they would, accept Jesus. And no, they wanted Barabbas, who was a robber and a known murderer. And when he wouldn't, relent to them, then they started basically accusing him, Pontius Pilate, of not being loyal to Caesar, because Pilate kept referring to Jesus as the King of the Jews, and the Jewish priests and authorities said, "We don't have a king. We don't have a king," which is a direct affront to God. God was supposed to be their only king, right? And so it even gets any worse that they start, now basically poking Pilate. So Pilate washes his hands of it and turns him over to it. And on the cross, there had to be a plaque, which was the thing that that the person was being executed for. And so he put in three languages, Greek, Hebrew, and Latin, King of the Jews, which the priests and the elders were just outraged with and said, they didn't want it on there. And Pilate said, "What I have written, I have written." And so that was how Jesus was crucified, as King of the Jews, right? And so then they take Jesus to Golgotha, which is the mountain of the skull, to be crucified, and they laid him down. He had to carry his own cross beam, this beam here, right? They would carry that up to the place where they were raised up, but he couldn't carry it. He was so badly beaten. And so they picked somebody, a guy named Simon, out of the crowd to carry it for him. Once he gets there, they lay him out and they drive spikes into this area right here. Not the palm of the hand, but here. And the reason they do it here is because it goes in between the two bones, and so when their weight is on it, it doesn't rip out. But even more than that, there's a nerve that runs through here, and so it is excruciatingly painful. Then they also take and put their 2 feet together, and they drive a spike down through their ankles for the same reason. So they're suspended on the cross like this, and as they let their weight sag, it collapses their lungs and they can't breathe. So they have to pull themselves up and push up with their legs to be able to get a breath. Now, Jesus was crucified in the 3rd hour, which corresponds to 9 a.m. in the morning. So he was on the cross at 9 a.m. And at noon, on the 6th hour, it says that the land became full of darkness. So high noon, where we are, brightest part of the day, and it became absolutely dark while he was on the cross. And it stayed that way until 3 o'clock, where he actually surrendered his spirit. Now, while he was on the cross, there were people at the feet of the cross. There were 3 Marys, believe it or not, and the only apostle that was there was John. And this is where Jesus tells his mother Mary, who is there, and says, tells John, behold your mother, and tells his mother, behold your son. And it says that John took her into his own home that day. But the ladies were watching all of this from afar, and everything we know about what happened on the cross, the 2 thieves and everything that was said, comes from the testimony and the witness of these women. So just an incredibly gruesome, excruciating time. And then at 3 o'clock, Jesus surrenders his spirit and dies. And the instant when he does that, there were several signs that happened. One was the temple veil was split. Now, in the temple where the Ark of the Covenant is, it's separated. That's the Holy of Holies. It's separated from the holy place by a curtain, which they were only allowed to go in there once a year to make atonement for the people, and there was a special way they had to do it, or the priest would even die. And so this veil hangs there, and it was ripped from the top to the bottom. Now, they say that this veil was almost a foot thick woven, and that you could not have had 40 oxen drawing in both directions to be able to pull it apart, and yet it split. And why was that? Because at that instant, the separation between God and man was no more. And so that Holy of Holies was opened up unto man. The second thing that happened was there was a great earthquake that shook the ground. And it says that the rocks split. And then the third thing that happened was it said that the graves were open, and some of the saints got up and walked into Jerusalem. And think about this. These are not resurrected bodies, right? Christ has not been resurrected. He is the first fruit of the resurrection. But what happened was basically they were brought back to life very similar to the way Lazarus was. So these were people that would be recognized in that time, and they got up out of the graves and walked into Jerusalem and proclaimed Christ. It's amazing, isn't it? And then Christ died, gave up the ghost and died. Now, because Sabbath would start at 6 o'clock that evening, basically, the priest didn't want Christ on the cross during the Sabbath. So they went to Pilate and they petitioned him to have the legs broken. Now, with the legs broken, when they come down, right, they can't breathe, and they would push up. Well, with their legs broken, they can't push up, and so they would die faster. Now, when they went to break the legs of the 3 men on the cross, Jesus was already dead. And so one of the soldiers took and put a spear into his side and outpoured blood and water. And just as out of the side of Adam, which was opened up, the rib became Eve, right? And woman, the bride of man, was born out of that. So in this picture, when the spear was pushed in and the blood and the water came out, the church was born, right? We are washed and cleansed through the water and blood of Christ. And so in that same picture, the bride of Christ, the church, was born in that instant. Now from there, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a secret follower of Jesus, came to Pilate and asked for his body. And Pilate asked about Jesus he was amazed that Jesus was dead already. This should have been a process that took days for him to die. And so he was amazed that he was dead already, but hearing that, he gave the body over to Joseph of Arimathea. Nicodemus, who we know talking back before, right, joined Joseph, and they prepared the body and put it in Joseph's tomb, a tomb that had never been used before, and they rolled this huge stone over it. Now, the ladies who had been at the foot of the cross, the Marys, plus a couple, saw all of this, and so they knew where he was. And so they then took and waited. And those are the events of Good Friday. This is what happened in Holy Week on Friday in the life of Jesus. Now, what do we take away from this? The biggest thing is how easy, I'm going to start with a smaller thing. How easy it is to get so entrained on religion that you lose sight of God. You know, the Pharisees were given all of the law, all of the commandments, all of the ordinances, all of the oracles of God. If anybody should have been able to see Christ, it was them. But they were so intent on hanging on to their religion that they couldn't see who he was. They missed God. And as a church today, we have some of those same things where we hold on to our religion, we hold on to our traditions, we hold on to the things that we think we know, that we fail to actually read the scriptures and see who God is, and we miss him. Don't be one of those. The second thing is what we actually deserve. You see, the Word of God says that it pleased God to crush him. The reason it went dark at 12 o'clock was because God had forsaken him. See, Jesus became sin. He who had no sin became sin. And at that time, God turned his face away from him, and it went completely dark. And Christ even cried out, "Father, Father, why have you forsaken me?" You see, he took on all our sin. The punishment that he was getting, the scourging, the trials, the crucifixion, all of the pain, all of the suffering, all of that, we deserve. That's ours. But he took it. He bore it for us so that we didn't have to. Not only do we not have to bear that judgment which God is righteous to give to us, but he then adopts us into our own family. And so there's this huge contrast between what we truly deserve, how wretched we really are, and the amazing love of God who did what we cannot do, which is to become righteous before him. And so when God's judgment was satisfied, when his wrath was satisfied by crushing his own son who became sin, we were free. But it's not over yet, because the best is yet to come. The best is yet to come, because the sign of Jonah is coming. And so I'm going to leave us here, and we're going to pick up tomorrow with what happened on Saturday in the life of Christ. Love you, church. Be safe. Have a good Friday, because God is so good. Amen.